Let's take a look at the first sensor mode on the G-Shock Rangeman. It's the altimeter mode. Before I get into it, it's important to understand that this G-Shock estimates altitude based on air pressure. Now, air pressure, of course, is not only affected by your altitude or elevation and the density of the atmosphere, it's also affected by changes in weather. So your altitude accuracy, the altimeter accuracy of this watch, is typically, I should say, commonly off by several hundred feet just because of normal weather changes. More drastic weather changes, of course, will disturb the accuracy even more. But pressing the sensor button over here, big red highlighted button, takes me into altimeter mode, and it begins taking readings immediately once per second for the first 3 minutes. And here it's showing a tendency graph. These light up once for each reading. Now, if I were climbing and changing altitude, these would be going up and down to indicate my changes in altitude from one reading to the next. After 3 minutes, this will drop down to a longer interval. There are actually a couple of choices. You can have it take a reading every 5 seconds for approximately the next hour, or you can have it take a reading every 2 minutes for the next 12 hours. Now there's actually 2 altimeter screens that you can look at in here. If you press the adjust button, this is a relative altitude. So it changes, it shows the relative altitude change in reference to whatever I set the reference at. And that's done by pressing the bottom right button. So right now, I'm actually at about 6,060 feet. The watch is showing 6,080 feet. If I press the bottom right button, I guess I have to hold it, or press it until it beeps. Okay, so I just set a relative reference point, and so it's showing that I have no change, plus or minus 0. Now, if I were to start climbing uphill or downhill, then it would show how much I've changed compared to the original reference of 6,080 feet. Now I press the adjust button to go back to the other screen. Over here in the dial, it also shows altitude changes compared to the last reading. Now this is fluctuating fairly rapidly because it's still taking readings every second. It'll go up to positive 30 meters, which is nearly 100 feet, and negative 30 meters down here. So when it moves this way, it means that I'm dropping in altitude, and if it moves this way, it means I'm, going up in altitude. Pressing the top right button here saves the current altitude reading into memory. If I press and hold the adjust button, I can set an altitude reference point. So for instance, I know from using Google that my elevation is actually 6,060 feet here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So I can manually adjust this. Okay, so now it's showing minus 20 altitude change compared to the reference that I set earlier using the forward button here. It's important to set reference altitude because, like I said, weather conditions affect the accuracy. So if you If you use this watch in conjunction with a topographical map that shows elevations, that's the best way to use it, because it means that once you fix your location on the map, you can use the altitude reading on the map to provide your watch with a reference altitude. And so the more often, especially if the weather is changing, the more often you can provide a reference altitude, the more accurate the watch is going to be. When it comes to changing your altitude reading interval, you do that by pressing and holding the adjust button. And of course, here is where you can change your reference altitude. But if you press the mode button down here, and now forward and reverse, or maybe just forward, I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess just forward. This is where you can change between having a reading taken every 5 seconds for 60 minutes or every 2 minutes for 12 hours. But those readings will only continue to be taken if you stay in the altimeter mode. If you exit the altimeter mode by pressing the mode button down here, then those readings stop. While the altimeter mode is active, it's going to be auto-saving data to the memory, which is accessible in recall mode, in the form of these max altitudes, minimum altitudes, total ascent, and total descent. They're cumulative ascent and descent. So if you go uphill and then you go downhill and you go uphill again and then you go downhill again, it'll save the cumulative amount of those 2 downhill descents and the 2 uphill ascents. So yeah, this would be the cumulative ascent, and this would be the cumulative descent. And the only way to, if you want to start over, you have to be in recall mode and you have to press and hold the adjust and clear those. Otherwise, every time you go into altimeter mode, it will add to what's already in the memory. It won't reset the memory to 0 and start over. I think that covers everything in regard to the altimeter mode. Just remember, you got 2 screens. The adjust button switches between the 2. So if you want to do relative altitude, you have to be on the right screen. And it only takes readings while you're in the altimeter mode, every second for the first 3 minutes, and then every 5 seconds for an hour, or every 2 minutes for 12 hours. And you can save readings manually using the top right button to record it. And it works in conjunction with the recall mode. So there's the 2 altitude readings that I saved: max altitude, minimum altitude, cumulative ascent, cumulative descent. Back into altimeter mode. Let's look at the digital compass mode on the Rangeman. Again, pressing the middle right button. Press it until you hear 2 beeps. You see COMP compass up at the top here. It's important to understand that it's like an old-fashioned compass in that it detects the magnetic fields of the Earth, and it pretty much doesn't work anywhere. except in the wilderness. Anything magnetic, electronic can affect it. You should not expect it to work worth a darn in any sort of vehicle, planes, trains, automobiles, boats. It points to magnetic north. So when it indicates north on the display, you got to make sure that you hold it level. Whenever you're using the compass, you should probably take it off your wrist and make sure that you're holding it level. So right now it's pointing to magnetic north. Oh, it just stopped. It only stays live for 60 seconds. If you want to get it updating again, press the reverse button up here. Okay, so now it's back. So it's showing magnetic north. If you want it to show true north, you have to use the magnetic declination adjustment. And you have to know what the magnetic declination is for your location. And that changes from month to month throughout the year. So, the mode is best used in conjunction with a topographical map, U.S. Geological Survey map or something. And because the sensor can be messed up by exposure to strong magnets or magnetic electrical equipment or electronics or whatever, you should always do a 2-point calibration before you use it. And the way to do that is to press and hold the adjust button. And now you don't have to point it north. You don't have to point it in any cardinal direction. You just press the reverse button. And now it says turn 180 degrees and it's ready for point number 2. So now I just spin the watch, again keeping it level, 180 degrees, and press the reverse button again. And it showed OK up there. If it shows error, ERR, then you want to repeat the process. So that just corrects the sensor, I guess. It's a magnetic orientation sensor. And again, when it's pointing north, it's showing magnetic north. If you want to set the magnetic declination, if you know what the magnetic declination is for your location, press and hold the adjust button as if you're going to do a 2-point cal, and then press the mode button. So right now it's off. You can set it for degrees west or degrees east. I think in where I am it's about 10 degrees east in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So press the adjust button again. So now I have the magnetic declination set, and when the watch is pointing north, it should be pointing true north, provided that my magnetic declination is correct. Google Maps doesn't really point exactly north as far as the orientation, but it's close. So if you look on Google Maps, a lot of buildings are oriented north, south. If you happen to live in a building that's got that orientation, that might tell you which way true north is. Maps are usually, true north rather than magnetic north. But again, if you're around buildings or inside buildings, especially, reinforced concrete structures and what have you, it's going to be off. So it's not a good place to do any calibration or trust that the compass is going to work accurately. If you want to maintain a certain bearing towards an objective, you can press the bottom right button here and store the bearing in the bearing memory. So now as you progress toward that objective, you can see whether you're, going in that general direction. But you may have to update the bearing objective as you go along. Again, this is the kind of thing that you need to be using in conjunction with a good map. The altimeter mode is also really only useful with a topographical map, so you can provide the watch with reference altitudes and such. The other thing you can do in the compass mode, if you press and hold the reverse button, you can store that compass reading to memory. It stores it along with the date and time. Not sure what that would be useful for, but you do have the option to do that. Over here on the little dial, you've got like 3 bars over here, which is showing you north. And I guess this is showing the bearing memory. And now it's just showing you directions. And the indicator inside the eye here is showing north with the wide lines, west, south, and east. And that's just always updating and showing you your orientation. North, east, south, and west. So I guess that's it. I mean, with this version 3 of the triple sensor technology, you get 60 seconds of live updating, which is pretty nice, and it's quick. It only takes a second for it to update the reading. And that's the Rangeman compass mode. You got the current time in all of the sensor modes, well, I guess except for this one. In altimeter mode, it shows you the current time, and in compass mode, the current time as well. And use the mode button to go back to timekeeping. Let's look at the third sensor mode, the barometer temperature mode. Press the mode button, and yeah, if you hear 3 beeps, it's barometer temperature. So you have a barometric pressure graph up here. The most recent reading is here on the right. Each little pixel indicates 2 hours, and it goes back 21 readings or 42 hours. As soon as you enter this mode, it starts taking readings every 5 seconds for the first 3 minutes, and then about every 2 minutes thereafter. And you can restart at any time by pressing the reverse button. The temperature, of course, is based on a different sensor. That's based on the thermosensor, and the barometric pressure is based on the pressure sensor. So it's 2 sensors in one mode. It's important to understand that the temperature sensor is inside the case of the watch. So it only knows the temperature of the air inside the watch. If you're wearing the watch, then the watch is actually going to get heated up by your body temperature, and that'll affect the temperature and make it inaccurate. It'll usually be, considerably higher than the actual outdoor temperature. So if you want an accurate outdoor temperature reading, you actually have to remove the watch from your wrist and set it aside so that it's not touching your skin or any other source of heat. Another thing that can affect it is direct sunlight. that can cause it to be inaccurate. So you kind of have to put it in the shade. It can be rather involved if you want to get an accurate temperature reading of the outdoor air. Underwater, even if you're wearing it, if it's exposed to the water, it'll equalize. The air temperature in the watch will equalize with the water temperature fairly soon and give you an accurate underwater temperature. If you want to change the units of measurement, of course, that's done from the timekeeping mode by pressing and holding the adjust button, then using the mode button until you see the word units displayed up here. And now you can use these 3 right side buttons to change between Celsius and Fahrenheit, hectopascals and inches of mercury, and feet and meters. Whenever you press the sensor button, it automatically takes you back to the last sensor mode that you were in. It doesn't start over from the beginning. For instance, the 1 beep first sensor mode is altimeter, but if you go to barometer and then go back to timekeeping and then press a sensor, it automatically takes you back to the last mode that you were in, the last sensor mode. Up here, this shows a barometric pressure change. I think it's 10 hectopascals in either direction. Barometric pressure, in order for it to be useful as far as predicting weather and so on, you have to stay stationary. If you're moving around, whether it's driving or hiking or biking or whatever, you're going to be changing altitude. And for that reason, barometric pressure is going to be changing. And it will not be indicative necessarily of any change in the weather. So barometers are really only useful if you're stationary and your altitude / elevation is not changing. One option that's available here in the kind of new to the Rangeman or to G-Shock is a barometric pressure alarm. If you press and hold the bottom right button, I don't know why it says info on. What it does is it shifts the graph over about 10 pixels. So now it's only showing the last 22 hours. There's basically 11 columns here instead of 21, showing the last 22 hours, with each one representing a 2-hour interval. So, about 1 day's worth. You see the word baro over here. Now, this indicates that the pressure change alarm has been turned on. So what will happen is if there's a sudden drop or rise in pressure, the watch will beep for about 5 seconds. And there will also be an indicator over here, either an upward arrow or a downward arrow, or kind of a looping arrow showing that the pressure rose steadily for a while and then it changed to a fall, or a looping arrow going the other way showing that the pressure dropped for a while and then started rising. Yeah, so pressing and holding the bottom right button again will turn it off. And so now your graph is restored, showing the last 42 hours, 21 columns, 42 hours of barometric pressure readings. You can also calibrate your thermometer using the I press and held the adjust button. So if you think that the temperature is inaccurate, you can calibrate it using the forward and reverse buttons. If you press both at the same time, it'll return to the factory calibration. Pressing the mode button down here, now the barometric pressure is flashing, so now I can calibrate that if I believe that the factory calibration is wrong, which probably won't be the case, but you do have that option to calibrate it. Also, in the barometer temperature mode, if you press and hold the top right button, it will record the temperature and the barometric pressure as a record in the memory. So if I go to recall mode, record number 3, there it is. So it shows that temperature and barometric pressure, and it also shows the date and the time at which that record was stored. So that about covers it as far as the basic functional usage of the sensor modes goes. There is, of course, more detailed information in the paper manual in regard to the graphical indicators and what they mean and how many units each little marking indicates, and how to apply some of the information to your real world outdoor hiking and mountaineering activities and so on. But as far as the overall usage of the functions, I think I covered everything.